How do we know that Jesus was a real person? Let's talk about it. For over 2,000 years now, it seems that everyone has been talking about Jesus and an informed decision about Jesus. This is the biggest decision of your life, and let's investigate Jesus together. So I had a personal experience with this question of, is Jesus real? I grew up in an environment where the people around me, my family, friend group, followed Jesus. I actually grew up going to church. I don't know what your experience is with church. Maybe you've never been, or maybe you've had a bad experience. But for me, growing up, I actually really loved it. I had a really loving family. I really loved my church community. I found that this kind of atmosphere, this kind of environment, it was attractive. And I saw the attractiveness of following Jesus. But I can remember when I was like in middle school, maybe 6th or 7th grade, and even with the attractiveness, even with the loving environment, I remember sitting in church. I can almost remember exactly where I was sitting, and I just thought, how do we know that Jesus was even a real person? I don't know where the thought came from, and it kind of bothered me for many years. I continued to believe because, again, like I said, like I loved the community and like I really benefited from it. But the question itself bothered me for a while. I wanted it to be true, but you know this. Just because you want something to be true doesn't make it true. In the same way, just because you don't want something to be true doesn't make it untrue. Like we need evidence. And I think this is an important point to make in our efforts to investigate Jesus, or really anything in life, is that we're not looking for what's possible, but what's reasonable. I mean, many things are possible, right? It's possible that you and I were both created 15 minutes ago with fake but very real seeming memories of our lives intact, right? It's possible. Is it reasonable? There's no reason to believe that. But again, we're looking for what's reasonable. So before we risk wasting a lot of time getting into this investigating Jesus, how do we know that Jesus really existed, that he was a real person? And we might ask the question, of anyone who lived long ago, how do we know that anyone really existed? Well, we have to look at the historical record. That is, documents that were written that would support the existence of someone, or archaeology, things like that. What's in the historical record? What evidence exists for Jesus? And so I want to look at 3 types of evidence. And I recognize that different evidence comes with different biases. So I'm going to look at these 3 different types. And the first is evidence that is biased for the existence of Jesus. The second is evidence that's unbiased about the existence of Jesus. And the third is evidence that's biased against the existence of Jesus. Let's look at the first one. So this first type of evidence is evidence that's biased for the existence of Jesus. Biased in the sense that we might look at documents that write from a position that people would want Jesus to exist, or would want you to know that he exists, would want you to believe in him. We're talking about like the Bible, right? And I know many will say you can't use the Bible to prove the existence of Jesus. They are biased for wanting Jesus to be real, right? But a little bit of that is kind of a misconception about what the Bible actually is. It's broken up into what we often refer to as the Old and New Testaments, or the Old Testament meaning like the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament referring to documents that are specifically about Jesus' life and his ministry and his movement and how it developed. And in this New Testament, there are actually 27 documents. And these 27 documents were written by 7 to 8 primary authors, clearly with some others who contributed to that. And these authors, most of them claim to be eyewitnesses to what Jesus did, his life, his movement. And another author actually says that he went through and investigated all of these other eyewitnesses. So what am I trying to say here is that we're not talking about the claims right now. We're talking about that these documents exist and that they contribute to the historical record. Does that make sense? And in their writing, they weren't writing to talk about whether Jesus was real or not. There's really no attempt to persuade any readers that Jesus existed, except to the extent that they include historical settings, geography, political settings, and things like that. Let me give you an example. There are 4 authors who write about Jesus' life and his ministry. You may have heard them before: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, Luke includes, probably more than the others, a lot of detail, specific detail about regions, about politics, about what was going on. Let me read to you a short little clip from Luke, just so you can see the detail. Listen to this example of the type of detail that Luke includes. This is coming from chapter 3 in the first 2 verses of it. It says, "In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness." Now, I'm not meaning to talk about the context of what Luke is saying, except to say that you can see how all of this detail, he's tying it into people who were ruling at the time in different regions. All of this you can go back and investigate, like breadcrumbs that have been laid out. Does that make sense? So these authors, while they're biased for Jesus, they're writing in a way that, well, there really wasn't any doubt of his existence. They're not trying to persuade you that he existed. Really, the issue is not for them whether Jesus existed, but who Jesus was. So the second type of evidence is evidence that is unbiased about the existence of Jesus. And there's really many examples in the historical record, but one really prominent one is from a first century Roman historian named Tacitus. And Tacitus lived from about 56 to 120 AD, or the Common Era. And Tacitus, who is writing about Rome's history, writes in the Annals of Imperial Rome about a time in Rome when there was a lot of different disturbances and a lot of social unrest. And at the time, Emperor Nero was reigning, and he looked to put the blame on Christians. So this is what Tacitus says about that period of unrest. He says, "Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, or Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate." So here we have, in the historical record, not long after Jesus lived, Rome, who is taking responsibility for the death of Jesus. Rome, who would have no biases whether to confirm or deny the existence of someone that they claimed was a criminal. Do you understand? To Tacitus, it was a fact that Jesus lived. He had followers, and Nero blamed them, and that was a cause for his torture. So this third type of evidence is evidence that's biased against Jesus. Evidence in the historical record from people who would have loved to act as if Jesus never existed. People who actually hated Jesus and his movement. And one really prominent one, and while there's many examples, one prominent one comes from a first century Jewish historian named Josephus, who lived from about 37 to 100 AD, or again, Common Era. And Josephus writes in his Antiquities of the Jews about a moment in time where a Jewish religious leader named Annas came into power for a short period of time, and he hated the Christians. He hated how this Jesus movement was spreading. So he took some of the leaders of the Jesus movement, James, the brother of Jesus, being one of them, and he brought them into trial. This is what Josephus says in the Antiquities of the Jews. High priest Annas assembled the Sanhedrin of judges, or what might be like a Supreme Court, and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others. And when he formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So here again, in the historical record, we have this interaction of Jewish leaders and the Jesus movement. And Josephus made no attempt to deny Jesus' existence, and no one else did either. These are coming from people who wanted to stop the movement of Christianity. Again, Josephus didn't try, and no one else denied his existence either. So these are just a couple examples. Again, evidence that is biased for the existence of Jesus, evidence that is unbiased about the existence of Jesus, and evidence in the historical record that is biased against the existence of Jesus. The bottom line is this, is that in the first 100, 200, 300 years or even more, there may have been different opinions about who Jesus was, but no one argued that Jesus didn't exist, right? And then today, you can travel to Rome, an empire that put Jesus to death, and there standing in a Colosseum is a cross, symbolizing the cross of Jesus. It totally turned the Roman Empire upside down. So as we've said in previous videos, something happened. And again, I know you may be unsure about all this, and this is why we're investigating this together. My hope is that you can see that that cross is actually for you, that Jesus laid his life down for you. But my objective, again, is to help you make an informed decision. So now we've established that the question is not whether Jesus was real. Jesus existed. The question is that when we look at the claims made about him, we look at the documents that are about him, are these documents reliable, or have over time they become legends? We'll talk about that in the next video.